Good afternoon. This is Michael Harding
And this is Christina Harding.
here with On the Arts, that show
Mm.
that is dedicated to blowing the lid off of all of these artistic secrets that we have here in Southern Utah that we do not want to be
So
artistic
many.
secrets anymore.
Mhm.
Now, I'll tell you, there is a lot going on artistically around town. We were actually having a delightful conversation with our guests here in the studio, who we're going to introduce in just one moment, about some of the concerts that are available right now. Particularly, we were talking about some of the faculty at Dixie State University. Nancy Allred, who has been a guest on our show. We also have Kauai Yu, who has also been a guest on our show.
yes.
We've got Glenn Webb, Dr. Glenn Webb, a fantastic teacher, a very good friend, and also a tremendous percussionist who has had concerts here. There's a lot going on in just the Eccles Fine Arts Building. I highly recommend that you keep your ear to the ground for any kind of events that may be going on. As well, keep your ear to the ground for things that are happening on the ground. I should say keep your ear to the ground for things that are happening at the Cox Auditorium and at the St. George Opera House and at the Electric Theater and at the Center for the Performing Arts at Kayenta. There are a lot of venues, a lot of things going on. Tuacahn has got some stuff going on in the Hafen and
How
such.
do we make it to every one of them, right?
I'm not sure we can, but hopefully you'll have an idea of what's going on out there, not only for some of the old favorites, the Chestnuts, some of the musical theater. There are a lot of Chestnuts out there. Brigadoon was one that happened
That was last year.
not too long ago.
That wasn't too
But
long ago.
we also had rehearsals happened again, something that we'll talk about with one of our guests in the studio for The King and I, something that a lot of people know.
Yeah.
Now, our two guests today are Rachel Cox, who we've had as a guest on the show before. We're having a lot of people come on back here.
Yeah.
And we've also got Paul Weens here, who was a guest at the beginning of this year, I believe, back in February, I think.
Long ago.
But I'll tell you, just to give you a little segue into this, I'd like to talk about kids. And that's something that I think will be a big part of our conversation today. Now, I've always been struck by the importance of the arts to kids, not only my own kids, but also seeing the kids of friends, the kids of enemies. I don't know.
You have enemies?
I'm not sure. They all pretend to be my friend. But I'll tell you, kids seem to really thrive when you allow them to sing, when you allow them to explore music and any kind of music, as long as they're loving what they're doing, to explore theater, to explore creativity as far as sculpture and painting and things of that sort. And in thinking about this, I was taken to, I mentioned those Chestnut musicals, one of my absolute favorites, and there are two very, very differing views on this out there, The Music Man. I have a lot of people who say, oh, it's just saccharine sweet, I can't stand it. And then you have people like me who say, oh, it's so saccharine sweet, I love it. And one of the things that I'm taken by in that is Professor Harold Hill, who is, of course, a con artist. He has what he calls the think system. And he applies that to any instrument, if you will, just as you don't have to think about the tune when you start whistling. He says you can do that with any instrument. You just think about the music, and you think about the music, and you become one with the instrument, and the music comes out. I think I'm actually making it a little deeper than
You
it
really
is in the
have
story.
at this point, but I'm
Thank you.
keep going.
But I'll tell you, one of the things I love about that show is he gets trapped in a net that he has cast as a con artist. But something I think that he learns that isn't necessarily spoken in the text is that there really is something deeper than the con. There is something deeper than just taking music lessons. And you start seeing everybody affected by this music that's around them. Now, this takes me to kids and what I mentioned earlier about the importance of the arts for them. And I think it's so wonderful that this isn't the wonderful part, but there is something wonderful that comes out of it. I grew up with a lot of people who they said, oh, I wish I could have learned the cello, but I didn't have a cello. I wish I could have learned how to play the oboe or the clarinet, but I didn't have an oboe or clarinet.
Are you talking about me?
Not at all.
Okay.
I'm talking about, I think, a lot of people out there. And I was just struck by the fact that, and this actually came from an experience I had on Halloween, we all have one instrument. And we have an instrument that was given to us. And it's not something that had to be created in Vienna to be a perfect instrument. But we all have a voice. We all have something that we can play with. And we're going to get into the actual craft and art of singing. But how wonderful that we all have this instrument that we can't, for the most part say, I'm not able to go to the store and buy it. It's something that, for the most part, we have. And what a wonderful thing, the experience I had on Halloween is you and I were actually heading out for a rehearsal, as a matter of fact. We're doing a play together. And this is on Halloween evening, and I looked across the street, and there was a family, and I think there was, a pirate and a princess, and, the things you see for costumes. And, they were a varying, span of ages. I think the oldest looked around 12 or 13, and there were a few in between that and one. And there was one little girl, and she was dressed as a ladybug. And she was walking along, and she was straggling behind the group, but it was clear she was part of it. And she couldn't have been more than 4 or 5, singing at the top of her lungs. And I have to admit, if she's listening right now, please know I'm not insulting you. It was not very pretty when it comes down to it. But nothing can compare to the joy and the sparkle in her eyes while she was singing. She had a costume. She loved how she looked. And in her mind, I can only guess, she was singing the most beautiful piece in the world. And I thought, wow, how wonderful that we have this opportunity. Now, our 2 guests in the studio, I did mention, we have Rachel Cox, who's a vocal teacher, as well as an actress, as well as a fantastic singer, as well as a founding member of some choral groups around town. We'll talk about that. And also Paul Weens, a very distinguished artist in his own right, as well as being an educator, having a history in academia, having a history of working with people, of creating groups that are around here. Welcome to the studio, both of you.
Welcome. Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Now, I've mentioned the joy that can come just from singing, and I think pretty much everybody has had the experience of singing in the shower. I know Billy Joel would be horrified at my renditions of his pieces that have occurred in the shower or in the car, and I think we've all done that. Let me ask you guys, you do a lot of training for singing. How do you approach this?
Shall I? All right.
Yes, take it, Rachel.
So how do you approach singing? Just
how do you
training that voice?
I can make loud noises and do them sometimes with music in the background. How do you start working on singing? A lot of people think a vocal lesson, and I was guilty of this myself when I was younger. You go and you sing, and the teacher says that was either good or bad, and then you try it again. There's technique. How do you go about it? And by the way, if you want to see these reactions, we do broadcast live.
Got to check out the video here.
We are streaming on Facebook at Radio St. George. That's RADIO with a space and then ST space George. That's on Facebook, and we're also streaming live on YouTube, and
so everyone can see.
Absolutely, and this will be archived for the
generations
future
generations.
But going back to the question,
sure. Well, I, as a voice teacher and as a singer, believe that anyone can sing. It was interesting. Early in my teaching career, I had a student come to me and say, "I know that I'm tone deaf, but I want to sing. And when I sing, I feel good, but people around me cringe, and I don't want to be that person anymore. Can you help me?" And that was probably the most extreme case that I've ever encountered. Most people come to the studio with some kind of at least sense of pitch and idea of what to do with their voice. But even in that particular case, we were able to work, and it is work, it's like training any part of your body. It's exercise. But we were able to work and develop that instrument. This particular singer actually had to learn the feeling. Instead of listening to themselves and getting a sense of pitch, they actually had to feel what was right. And I would have to say, that's it. You found it. That's it. What does that feel like? So we had a lot of conversations in that particular lesson. But I think in general that anyone can learn to sing, and it should be a part of all of our lives because it brings joy, but it does something for your soul, for something deep inside of you when you're actually breathing deeply and making a beautiful sound. And we're lucky as singers that we get to use text. We have beautiful poetry that we get to share. And I think there's something powerful and strengthening and important about the act of singing. And I believe that anyone can do it. And like I said, most cases aren't quite as extreme as that first student of mine, but there's an ability for any person to make a beautiful sound and to find great joy in it.
Almost in
complete agreement with Rachel.
How dare there be disagreement
Almost.
in the
Here
arts?
we go. Okay.
So as an idealistic college student, I was mistakenly put in charge of several children's choirs.
Mistakenly.
Yeah, because the theory was, and this is the mistake, that the younger and least experienced you are as a teacher, then that means you ought to start by teaching children. And it's really the opposite.
Yeah.
You can teach adults more easily, much more easily, because of behavioral issues, among other things, than you can teach children. So children are very challenging, in my opinion. But I remember a particular boy, maybe 10 years old, who was, we called it tone deaf at that time. And I would give him special lessons, and I would sing in his ear, and I would have him do sirens, try to get him to do sirens with his voice. Because somehow between his ear and his voice, the nerves, the connections were not complete in such a way that he could even manipulate, not even match pitch, but he could not at the beginning even make a siren sound. It was just not possible.
Interesting.
So I began to modify my optimistic view that every person, and I think you said that generally, and I would say that maybe 95 out of 100, or some high percentage of people can sing. If you get a group of 30 people, they can almost always sing. I think the big crime, if you will, among vocal music teachers in elementary school often is that a child is told that he cannot or she cannot sing.
Yeah.
Or cannot, worse yet, carry a tune in a bucket. And most of those people that I have run into can actually sing Happy Birthday, which means they're salvageable. Yeah. On the other end of this is we can all be taught, more or less, how to sing, but I believe that as a gift from God, some of us have mechanisms, physical mechanisms, that are superior to other people's. So if I took 500 voice lessons, I could maybe go here. But another person who had this fabulous voice could go 10 times farther. And I might reach a ceiling, but they might go farther. Yeah. And the problem with the voice is you can't buy a new one.
Right. Can't go out and upgrade.
And it's amazing how many people seem to think they can. They just think, I can take lessons and I'll be amazing. Give me a month, and I'll be ready to go. Yeah.
Sometimes it takes years.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, Rachel, I wanted you on the show today, and Paul, but you have started a children's choir.
Yes.
And we had discussed about this a little bit last spring, I believe. And you had worked for me. I watched how you worked with children when you did music direction for Willy Wonka and helped me with that. And I loved how you were with those children. And I remember you were saying to me that you really wanted children to get back into the classics. And you really felt that they could embrace those instead of all this, the modern music that's coming out now, that you wanted to get back to those basics and the classics, and you had such a desire to do this, and you were so excited. You knew this was going to happen, and now it's happening.
It has.
And yes, Rachel, can you explain a little bit? What is your children's choir?
Sure. So we are the St. George Children's Choir, and we are under the umbrella of the St. George Chamber Singers, which the wonderful conductor next to me directs. Yeah. And so we are 46 voice children's choir. Yes, 46. And the ages are 9 to 13. So we have quite a good mix. About a third of our members are boys, which I was thrilled about.
Wow, boys.
Yes, and most, perhaps even all, but I should say most, came of their own volition and not their
moms weren't pulling their hair
and door,
making,
right?
Bribing them.
And some of the strongest singers in the group are some of our boys. So that's been a real surprise to me and a joy to see that aspect of our children's choir.
Hey, I was a voice soprano.
See? And look what happened.
In my little town of Hillsboro, Kansas, that had a total of 2,000 people in it, I was the star boy soprano.
Oh, beautiful.
Until my voice changed.
And then it all went down.
But I got to ask you, I mean, there really is joy in a children's choir that's singing beautifully together. And you do see that joy that I saw in this little girl's face on Halloween. Now, that brings up a question for me when dealing with people of this age. You mentioned it, Paul, just a little bit. How do you deal with a vocal mechanism that is changing, that is not necessarily fully formed? Surely that has to be something that you deal with.
Well, everybody's voice is changing. So it's a completely dynamic. My voice is going downhill at my age. I've been going downhill for 10 years, but I think that that everybody's voice is. I don't know. When you said changing, you mean adolescence?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
The physiological changes that are so intense.
When that happens to a boy, I can tell you that it's traumatic. For most boys, I was in the middle of I was Tiny Tim in Christmas Carol. A little musical rendition of this, and 2 weeks before my voice changed.
No,
and half the notes that I sang were an octave lower. It was pathetic.
And God bless us all, everyone.
It was just, the worst nightmare. But what's the director going to do? He couldn't, the show had to go on, and there I was. But in Rachel's choir, I know we've talked about this. In her auditions and checking of the voices, she made sure that, you cannot in a children's choir deal with male changed voices and the soprano high voice of a child. It's so. All 46 of her singers are going to be the girls and/or male unchanged voices, and that's where we are with that.
And you said that they auditioned. When did they come into these auditions?
So it was in August. We began right after Labor Day to start rehearsals. So we just brought them in. The first year, we brought them in just in small groups and had them do a rather simple audition. I taught them a song. We did a few scales, and then I taught them a very simple song and had them sing it back in a group, and then sort of surprised them and just started pointing and saying, "Sing it for me. Go ahead." And they responded beautifully. All 46 of them. And some of the boys you can tell, their voices are starting to lower, but we're a treble choir, so we're all, unchanged voices, and so far we've been all right. Some of our boys are altos, and that works just fine. So.
Yeah, you mentioned something about the beauty of watching children sing, and that's adults just don't have that, generally speaking. We can look enthusiastic. Yeah. We can
chamber singers.
Yeah, even
chamber singers.
Joyful.
Tired.
Yeah, they're all tired. and or they can be serious, or they can be dramatic in terms of expressing the music. But the child's face, even when when the child is most serious, is the most enthralling. There's this cherubic shining star, but there's also this concentration which is so amazing. You say, wow, I want to go see that. You can't just buy a recording. You have to be there to see the children, this tall and this kind of face.
I have to speak to that. I have to tell you this experience that I had recently. It was actually with one of our boys in the children's choir. During the second rehearsal, I was conducting, and I make eye contact with the children as we're working together, and I noticed one of my little alto boys had stopped singing, and I studied his face and noticed he had a tear coming out of his little eye, and I thought, oh my goodness, did somebody say something to him? I thought maybe one of his neighbors said something, or maybe he was feeling uncomfortable. It was only our second rehearsal, so I thought, I need to grab him after rehearsal and just check on him. But as soon as rehearsal ended, it was craziness, and I couldn't get to him before he left. So the next week, I was standing in front of the choir again. This is our third rehearsal now. And I thought, I need to keep an eye on this little guy and making sure he's doing all right. And again, about halfway through the rehearsal, I looked over at him and he had his eyes closed and tears coming down his cheeks. And I thought, oh my goodness, what is going on? So rehearsal ended and I wanted to go find him, but he came to me instead and gave me a great big hug and said, Miss Rachel, sometimes the sound is so beautiful when everyone is singing that I just have to stop and listen. And it makes me cry. It's so beautiful. And I mean, I just sat right there and cried with him because to see a 10-year-old boy experience that depth of emotion, that is, it's a gift to feel that deeply. And those of us who love choral music feel that so often when we sing. And to see this little person experience that for the first time and the power of music in his soul was beautiful and incredible. And he's come to me after every single rehearsal and said something slightly different, but always along those lines, that Thursdays, which is the day we rehearse, are his favorite day of the week, that he looks forward to rehearsal every week.
Fantastic.
He makes really beautiful and astute comments about the sounds he's hearing and how the voices are working together. And it's amazing to see that affecting him. And you're right, Dr. Weens. You see it on their faces. I feel it's the most incredible joy to stand in front of those children.
And this child's aha experience, which I guess is happening at every rehearsal now, is branding him, is burning into his soul. He won't ever leave singing. He won't be able to. Whether he pursues it professionally or just the love of his life. It's seldom the intellectual experiences which keep us going when everything falls apart. It's those, for me, often those emotional moments, and I can, give you a handful of musical moments where I wasn't prepared for what I was going to feel. It struck me, and I was sort of powerless in its grip. And when that happens, you're home.
Yeah. Well, this is all. I hope you don't feel like I'm trivializing this at all. I use a lot of movie references, a lot of theater references, and things of that sort. Have you ever seen the movie The Shawshank Redemption?
Yeah. Yes.
I'll tell you one of my absolute favorite scenes, and this gets to the innocence that children have, but also how the music can affect an adult. There's that beautiful, beautiful scene where you've got Andy. I can't remember his last. Andy Dufresne, and he's in the warden's office, and he's going through a bunch of vinyl records, and he finds, oh my gosh, I think it was, I can't remember which one it was, Cosi van Tutti or something like that, I'm not sure.
Yeah, from an opera.
Yeah, and he put the record on the record player, and you could see him. He was in a prison, a pretty hardcore prison, and with a lot of hardcore prisoners, and you could see him escaping for a while. In fact, later on in the movie, he says how he survived solitary confinement was he had his friends. He had Mr. Shakespeare and Mr. Mozart and Mr. Beethoven in his head that he could talk to. And in the scene, he actually places the record player right next to the PA system, which goes out over the entire prison. And I just think it's a beautiful, beautiful scene where these voices are soaring over this prison, this really harsh environment. And the way it's staged, if you will, for the film, all of the prisoners, wherever they happen to be, are just stopped. And they're just listening. And I think it's Red who says, the character Red, played by Morgan Freeman, who says he doesn't know what those ladies were saying because it was Italian. But he imagined it was so beautiful, it had to be expressed in song. And for a few moments, every single person trapped by those walls was set free.
So in Saving Private Ryan, there is a scene before the Nazis attack the bridge at Ramadan. And these guys, who are about, most of them die, put on this French art song an LP with a lady singing a French art song, and they all just quieted. She was not a great singer, and not a terrific song, but the contrast of that beauty against the harshness of the destroyed city that they were in and the impending battle that they were going to face, those two things facing each other, it's like two magnets using opposite poles. There's a synergy between them. But most of the experiences I have had have been in situations where the symphony's playing beautifully, and in this case, the children's choir in the Britain War Requiem was in the balcony, and I'm part of the adult chorus, and it's just the most beautiful thing in Atlanta Symphony Hall, and the children then sing this tune that I can't remember right offhand what it is, but it's just like it shot into us, into our hearts. And it was a good thing we weren't having to sing right at that moment.
That's right. I think it was a vocal teacher here at DSU, I can't remember who, but talked about the emotional parachute. I remember that every artist has to have, but particularly a singer, because you can be so overwhelmed by the music, and yet you still have to keep that craft going. You still have to keep control of the instrument. I'll tell you, when I watch instrumentalists play, Yo-Yo Ma is a favorite of mine, but, many, many different ones. I used to really enjoy watching Andre Watts perform on the piano, and you would watch their faces, and they would just be so into it. And I remember being fascinated. My brother, I've mentioned this many times, is a pianist, and I would be fascinated watching their face and saying, what is in their head while they're up there? I mean, when I play, I'm thinking about, hey, what's for dinner tonight?
One of my suspicions, and I'm a cynic about musicians, is that many times they're acting. I hate to poke a hole in the balloon.
That's okay.
I wish that every musician that I watched that I could trust, but I've seen enough musicians who are acting out their great sonata at the piano.
Let me show you how I feel.
And I'm just emoting, and you'll never understand how deeply I feel. Children, on the other hand, usually can't pull that off.
No.
What you see is what's there.
Yeah.
And maybe that's part of what's so great about it.
Yes.
I think, we talk about the kids in those moments where you see the sparkle. I've seen plenty of choirs as well where you mentioned that a lot of these boys were coming of their own volition. I've seen plenty where they were told, you will be in the choir, you will sing. So I think it does go both ways. But.
Yeah. Yeah. So how often do you rehearse? You said once a week?
Yeah, once a week for 1 hour.
Oh.
And I was honestly pretty concerned about that. These are children, and repetition is a big deal for those little minds. They don't read music yet. But we created practice tracks for them to help them learn their parts, and they've been really diligent about those listening exercises. And honestly, they have exceeded my expectations for them at every rehearsal. A few rehearsals ago, our concert is this Friday, our first concert, and 7 o'clock in the St. George Tabernacle. And so a few weeks ago I said, all right, let's see how close to memory we are by next rehearsal. I'd really like to be able to put that music down, but let's try it today. Every single one of them put the folders down and just sang completely from memory. And they continue to do that. They just exceed my expectations.
And so this concert this weekend is going to be with the chamber singers,
it is.
Correct?
It's a joint concert.
So the children's choir will begin the concert with five pieces. Five pieces, and the audience will be wrapped, and then the old people will get up and they'll say, "Oh man, we have to listen to these guys."
You hear the program shuffling out there.
But the chamber singers are. Rachel is one of the strongest singers in the chamber singers, and one of the founding member on the board and all this, and is a group of wonderful singers. Several of whom have advanced degrees in music all the way up to the PhD, and training and experience with BYU singers and other groups of that ilk. And so they come loaded and have relatively high expectations.
Oh.
And that's great because I can deal with high expectations.
He certainly can.
Rachel's like, I want to testify of that.
Preach, my friend.
Come to me. I will challenge you yet.
And so what can we expect from the chamber singers at this concert?
Interestingly, most of the music that I've chosen is new music that I have not conducted before. And some of this music I heard listening to Spotify as I am building my clocks in my garage. I'm a woodworker and I build these kinetic sculpture type clocks. And so I've been listening to Stephen Chapman, who is a Canadian composer, and I was fascinated by what I heard, and I called my Canadian friend, Hilary Apfelstadt, and she said, oh, yes, I've conducted all of those pieces, and I recommend them highly, and two of them had a clarinet solo and a cappella choir, and who'd have ever thought of that? And we have a fine clarinetist, Mary Wild, in our group, who is a
fantastic
solo clarinetist, and so she will play, and the other composer is Williams. What's his first name, Rachel? Roderick.
Yes.
I think it's Roderick Williams. Whom he's from the U.S., but he's a young guy that's less than half my age, and he's become quite the 16, the famous 16 has premiered some of his works. And so we're doing two of his really fine choral pieces. And then a couple from old dead composers like
good.
We always need those.
Because they can't complain anymore. Jules Massenet, the opera composer, has written some choral things, and we're singing one big thing by him, and a short motet by Felix Mendelssohn. And so altogether, I don't know, 30 minutes of wonderful music.
30 minutes, Ben. Wow.
Well, I have to ask you, I mean, there's one thing to have musicians come in who have very high expectations, who are trained, have sung with these really great organizations. With kids, how do you choose repertoire? I'll tell you, when I don't consider myself a singer. I've always said I can carry a tune in a bucket, sometimes in a barrel, if I'm on a really good day. So that's when you used that phrase earlier. I thought, maybe I need to rethink that phrase. But I'll tell you, I had a teacher named Sterling Scoggins, and I was 13 years old, and the thing I remember most about him is that name. I thought, how wonderfully Dickensian, even when I was younger. But I went in and I said, I want to learn to sing because I really don't know what I'm doing. And he was wonderful. He was a very classically based, and it's a very broad spectrum, but teacher. And he said, well, have you ever seen the Muppet movie? And I was like, yeah. And he said, let's start with Kermit. Let's see how you do. So I was singing, what is that? Why are there so many?
Oh, no.
And I was working on that. And I'll never forget, he let me do that for 2 or 3 lessons. And I remember he would just let me sing. And he would say, oh, did you have fun? Okay, try this, maybe a little louder here or something. And it was on the 3rd or 4th lesson when he said, wow, I'm listening to your voice. Have you ever heard of Mozart? And I was like, yeah, I've heard of this guy. And he was like, do you know who Papageno is? And I was like, no, I don't. I am a man of widespread fame. And he was like, it's exactly the same as, the Rainbow Connection. And now I look back thinking, well, I think I was being played just a little bit. But
Good teacher right there.
But he slipped in. He was like, okay, sing Rainbow Connection. He was like, well, look at this portion right here. That's kind of the same. Can you sing that just as well? And I did. And all of a sudden, I'm singing Mozart. So I have to ask, I don't know if any of your children are listening at this point, but do you trick them? How do you present them?
Well, we try to choose repertoire that, of course, we think will interest them, but that is of a classical nature. So my goals this year for the repertoire were to find things that were varied, so that it wasn't all the same, because each child is affected by something different and loves something different. And to not shy away from languages and from harmony, working in multiple parts, to give them a variety of experience. And it's been interesting to see them react. Different children love different pieces. We are currently working on a piece in Hebrew and
wow,
one in Latin, and
with 9-year-old children.
We are
beautiful.
We are,
nice.
and they'll sing from memory. They'll sing those languages.
Yeah.
We're working in German. And we're doing a piece, a Slavic piece. So a lot of variety. I also try to choose some pieces that are just really beautiful, that allow that that depth of text and music together to really touch their hearts. Which I think that that experience with my little alto boy was a great example. But it is a tricky thing to choose repertoire that will not be too advanced. It's something that they can do, but that will still challenge them and that will allow us to teach good, healthy principles. A lot of these children have not sung much before. So as a voice teacher, it's important to me that the repertoire allows me to teach them how to create beautiful sounds, how to sing healthily, how to.
Yes.
We work a lot on vowel production, and especially the ah. I start with a tall ah vowel, and so I chose some pieces that have 50 ahs in the context of the text.
Yeah.
So we're sort of sneaking in the side door and teaching.
Yes.
Good solid technique wherever we can.
Well, I'm sure St. George doesn't have any of the choirs that are the opposite, but I have been some places where the children have been taught to sort of yell or speak.
Oh, Rachel just cringed.
Speak yell.
Yeah.
And the range of pitch is maybe 4, 5, 6 pitches. And the tone that you hear from the children makes you cringe because you think of those of us who know what happens to the mechanism inside and how delicate it is in a child can just imagine sort of the terrible thing that's happening when you hear that. Plus, there is practically no art in that experience. So Rachel's model, first of all, she models with her voice the sound. I'm sure she simplifies her voice in order for it to connect directly. And then I haven't yet been at a rehearsal, but I can guarantee you she has vocalized, have the children sing through a wide range. And she's probably, I don't know, how high did you go with the children? How high did you vocalize?
In their
in the warm-ups.
Up to high C.
Yeah, exactly. See, I was going to say that. High C. We're talking 2 octaves above middle C.
Wow.
And
Which they all sing.
Everybody.
Single one of them.
And you don't tell them how high that is.
Yeah,
you just we're going to sing, and you just take them up. It's a con. And,
Yeah.
and you don't give them any fear about that.
Right.
And she models this, and then they sing this wonderful, beautiful quality that we're going to hear on Friday night.
Oh, my goodness.
Well, if
What
I
an
may share
opportunity.
an experience, this was a show last year, I believe, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. Now, I got to watch my beautiful wife, Christina,
Oh,
she
thank you.
directed,
Yeah.
and also Rachel Cox was the vocal director for this. I had the pleasure of sitting in on auditions. For that, I was, kind of ushering, children to their auditions and such. And Rachel, I was amazed at something. We talk about how you con them, if you will. Not necessarily a con in this case, but I noticed they all came in and they were very nervous and, they had trouble plugging in their device for the MP3.
Yeah, scared to death.
And they were very nervous for their piece. And I was impressed. You pulled them over to you and you said, I just want to do a diagnostic. Didn't even explain what that was to them. And you just said, would you please sing this? And I'll never forget, it was very soft, and you just did, ooh, just 3 pitches.
Yeah.
And I remember it was so clear, and I watched every single one of these auditioners just say, oh, I can do that.
That's easy. Then the fear left.
And they did, and I was amazed at how much you were able to pull from that, to extract from just those 3 simple, of course, that doesn't mean easy, but those 3 simple tones from them.
To a trained person like Rachel and somewhat myself, when we do we don't use the word audition with children, but
right.
But in the first 30 seconds, if that long, we know 90% of what we need to know.
And what is that you're learning about them? Yeah. Give away your secrets. And
well, you right away hear the tone quality. You know, if it's clean or smoky or husky. You know, do the pitches change easily? Do they do it kind of without thought? Do they mimic your pitches without overthinking it? They just do it, or is it a big pain somehow for them? And that already tells you a lot about the child.
Yeah, it reminds me of even when we audition in theater and how we make them play a game. You know, we can see more of a child's truth when we play a game with them than when they come in with a piece prepared, because they're set in their way and they're nervous.
Right.
If you play, suddenly they become themselves, and you can see what you're able to work with.
Right.
You know, and what you can mold. So yeah.
I think too that as we hold an expectation and exude confidence that they can meet that expectation, they always do.
They will, yeah.
If they know that you confidently have paved a path that they can follow, and that you believe in them, they will go to the moon for you. Yeah, they will. I've seen that. You know, as we've done. I've been teaching them solfege, do, re, mi, fa, so, la, ti, do. We do exercises and introduce parts of our pieces using solfege and the hand signs that go with it. And none of them have experienced anything like that before, very few anyway. And they just, if you just say, this is what we're doing, and you don't even say, you just start singing, you just do it, and they will go right along with you. Or you just vocalize them up to a high C, every last one of them, and they do it because it's just because you know that they can, and you expect them to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, you just reminded me of something. I spent a good amount of time in Seattle. And one of the great things about kids there, and it being a city, is you could go to Seattle Center at, any time of the day, and there would be kids there who are, some kids, they set up lemonade stands. Sometimes they, I don't know, they sell chocolate bars. These kids, they became buskers on the street. And
wow,
they would be out there singing. They were singing, La Bamba, or they were singing, show tunes or something. Because, of course, you have the Intiman and Seattle Rep, right there. But I remember this kid, and I was so amused in not even in a bad way, but he had a little keyboard, one of those little Casio keyboards, and he would sing, not a great voice. In fact, he was tone deaf. He had no sense of where the pitches were going or what have you, which was okay, except he started singing the song "Doe a Deer" from Sound of Music. And the poor kid, he would play along beautifully, but he was like, "Doe a deer, a female deer."
Wow.
Right? And it was this monotone thing. And I have to say, it would have been heartbreaking, except for the fact that he had that look of joy. And I think I actually did throw, $3 or $4 in his...
Maybe he got the joy from the rhythm. But if it's not quite true, because I have seen examples that have disproven this. But most people who can't change pitch, I'm pretty sure, do not hear music the way you or I do. They cannot hear all the kaleidoscope has gone gray for them orally, I think. I mean, I don't know that, but
it makes sense.
but I'm pretty sure. I wanted to go back to something that Rachel was, when she said, "Oh, I just vocalize them to high C," and I think we've talked about this before, but our students, our charges, our children, our adults can learn what we can teach. And if we aren't good teachers or can't teach, there is no hope. They could come to you with a 50-voice audition children's choir and thrown into someone's hands, and if that teacher is incapable of teaching, that group is going nowhere.
Yeah.
And that puts at once a huge burden on the teacher, but there's no escaping that, and there's no sense that we should try. We should just have to understand our responsibility.
Yes. Yeah. I was thinking, all these mothers and fathers out there listening right now that want their children involved in this children's choir, how do they go about getting in touch with you?
Well, we have an email address and a website, actually. That's the easiest way to connect. We, as a organization associated with the St. George Chamber Singers, we share a website. Okay. So stgeorgechambersingers.org is where you go, and there's a drop-down menu for the children's choir.
Great.
And you can find all the information, contact information, audition information on that website. We do have a few spots that we will open up for our January through the end of April. We do have a few spots. So if there are some interested folks, they should
And what about the
us.
chamber singers? Would they, if someone had a beautiful voice? And
Sure.
wanted to
One more thing about the children's choir. I've heard a rumor that possibly next year there might be a training choir. Is that still in your thinking?
Yes, in
So,
the works.
so at least adults or children, if they're listening, but mostly parents, shouldn't imagine that this is now a full group and there's no hope. So it's possible, not only to get into in January and certainly next fall, but there is, there is some possibility depending upon the limits of Rachel's energy and so on.
Yes.
And your question about the chamber singers
the chamber
was
singers. Do people audition for this? And how's that?
basically in the fall.
Okay.
We start up, and it's a very democratic situation. Everyone, including Rachel, re-auditions.
Oh.
So
You have to prove yourself every year.
If we don't have it that way, if it's by heritage, then new people who come to town or people who've decided to sing don't have equal opportunity.
No, I like that.
And that's not fair.
I like that. Yeah.
Well, that's right. I have to tell you, we talked a little bit about the conning of children, and also how auditions and how to get into these organizations and such. And I'm tying everything together. If you're not clear on what we're doing, we are almost out of time.
Yes.
I'll tell you.
Wow.
But I'll tell you something that strikes me as so important, being a teacher of the arts, or being just somebody who gives opportunities for the arts, or someone who wants to inspire, is the love that you have for it, for the artistry. And I have to tell you, this is how I'm conning St. George right now. I'm conning Southern Utah. And I have to say, that's by doing this show. I'll tell you, the conversation we've had, I can honestly say I've learned some stuff. And the energy is just infectious. And we've seen that with so many of our guests. And I mentioned at the beginning that it's about blowing the lid off of all these secrets. I have to admit that it's a selfish benit as well.
Yes,
I get
for
to
us.
learn here. And I've had a great time here in the studio. I hope that the participants in your organizations, in your groups, and your ensembles get that as well.
Oh, I'm sure they are. I mean, just look how they are. Rachel and Paul, the energy and the passion that they have, I can just see that this would just be, infectious to your choirs. It's great.
Well, we hope.
Yeah.
So Rachel and I and others, Roger Hale at Dixie State in the choral department, are pushing the envelope. That is, there hasn't been a children's choir like this ever.
No, there hasn't. It's about time.
There hasn't been a chamber singers of the level that we are, and we're still growing. We're a lot stronger this year than we were last year. So I don't know where this is going to go.
It's fantastic.
We'll have you on in 8 more months.
Yes.
So you can tell us that.
But the edge needs. Otherwise, we're sitting over here in this island between Las Vegas and Salt Lake City, with desert all around us, and we're just going to sit here and cook at a medium temperature, at the same temperature we've been cooking at for the last decades, and we just we're not quite happy with that, and we're willing to take some risks.
Yes.
Absolutely. And I think they are paying off. I think this concert on Friday evening is going to be a strong concert. I think we stand as chamber singers to deliver a better concert than we have yet. Our best concert, I would say, we're poised to give. And I think the children will be delightful.
And this is free.
This is free in the
at
St. George Tabernacle.
And then you also have another concert on Saturday, November 17th at 7:30 at the Eccles Concert Hall.
We do.
And is this free also?
So, yes, all of these concerts on this card, the one you mentioned, that one is free and is at Eccles, and we're partnering, the chamber singers are partnering with Roger Hales, chamber singers. It's a nice combination.
Yeah.
And then we're going to Desert Hills High School on November 28 and partnering with the Pine Valley High School Trilogy and the Desert Hills High School. I don't know what the name of their group is, but it's a chamber singers kind of group.
Oh, wow.
Those are two fine conductors, Rob Reimer and Joe Wolf. And how great to put chamber singers together.
Yeah, what great concerts. And these are all free?
Yeah. It's a shame, right?
I just can't believe it. I just think, wow, the opportunities, take advantage and go hear these beautiful voices.
Anything else on that, Christina?
Oh, just to remind everybody about this Friday at 7 o'clock. This is going to be a great concert.
It will be.
Yeah.
It will be one to remember.
Yes.
Don't miss it.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you again, sadly, we are out of time. But thank you to
Always.
all of
We
our
talked
6
about it.
listeners. Thank you for
We're
joining
up
us.
to 6. We're growing.
By the end of the year, we're hoping for double digits.
We might be there, yeah.
But I'll tell you, this has been a fantastic conversation. I hope you've had a good time here with us on the show.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
And we do hope that until you hear from us again, we will not have a broadcast this coming Thursday, unfortunately, due to some conflicts. But we will be back a week from today on Tuesday at 4 p.m. Listen for us on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 4 p.m. And until we get a chance to talk again, keep your focus on the arts.